Welcome to the Men's Health Unscripted podcast with Patrick and Cam.
We're focused on everything on men's health, looking at your emotional, your physical, and your spiritual well-being. You're going to take care of that and make sure you keep on going.
What's going on, guys? It's June, so you know it's Men's Health Month, and we are going to reframe the way you're thinking about men's mental health with our guest, Matt Stefanko. He's the CEO of a company called Manual. We're going to hear all about it and the ways that him and one of our great podcast guests, Dr. Justin Human, are helping change the way people see men's mental health. So, Matt, thanks for coming on the show. We're really excited to talk to you. Tell us a little bit about how you got into the men's mental health space.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I think it's a great month to be doing this. And I think one of the reasons why we're trying to have more conversations about mental health during this month is I think sometimes men, when talking about health and men's health, we get a very specific end of the stick in the sense of a lot of conversation about check your prostate and not enough conversation about what's going on with men in total. And that's not to say that men shouldn't be paying attention to their prostate in Men's Health Month, but there's so much else going on with men today. And so being able to talk about that and focus on that area, I think is really important. There's a couple of reasons why we've started Manual and sort of my foray into this topic. I can give you a little bit of the personal background, and I'll talk about how sort of professionally I've found my way there. The personal background, I grew up in a smallish town. I guess it's getting bigger in Minnesota. But I was surrounded by a lot of men that were, my grandpa was a long haul truck driver. My uncle runs a hardware store, lots of folks with military background. And I didn't grow up in an environment in which those men were sharing what they were going through. I think my perception of them growing up was that they weren't going through anything that was difficult. That's still to this day sort of all I know. I imagine that not to be the case. Like most people, they've probably gone through things that are difficult. But that was the environment in which I was sort of raised in. I personally struggled with mental illness and anxiety from a really young age. And like them, never really opened up or talked with anyone about it. I was getting good enough grades in school that the conversation was never really about doing anything other than going to college. Not a lot of conversation checking in on me or anything like that. I sort of struggled in this silence for a pretty extended period of time. And then even when I got to college, there was an element of substance misuse and all these sorts of things, which can get into as we sort of dive into the conversation. But it took me a really long time to get help. To start going to therapy, started being open to, with myself and the people around me about what was going on. And I think I had a couple close calls, and I think that I feel really lucky that I got through that situation. But I know of other stories of other young men that I've met or have heard of that had very similar backgrounds to me that aren't here today anymore. And I think we continue to see that happening. So anyway, that's sort of the personal passion behind the topic, and certainly can talk more about that story if interested. But I think the sort of professional orientation is that when I started paying attention to my own mental health, I wanted to work in the field. And so I moved to Baltimore City, took a job in their health department, leading their opioid policy response. I've been in sort of this world of behavior change and health promotion, and how do you convince people to take care of themselves and their communities on these topics. Has been something that I've been doing now for really most of my career. Previously, I was at a nonprofit called Shatterproof. I was leading their anti-stigma and health promotion efforts. We were big multi-million-dollar campaigns in the state of Kentucky, the state of California, et cetera. And time again, we were seeing that the campaign was extremely successful, except for one demographic group. And you can probably imagine where I'm going here, but it was young men sort of aged 18 to 35. These were the guys that we couldn't figure out how to touch on these sorts of topics and get them engaged. And it had me start thinking about what was going on with young men in our country as it reflects, my personal background and personal story. I'll rattle off sort of a few statistics, but young men in our country are 4 times more likely to die by suicide than young women. They're 3 times more likely to die by overdose than young women. We're probably within 5 years of a situation where our college graduation is going to be 2/3 female, 1/3 male. So not only are men struggling with behavioral health issues, they're starting to disconnect from institutions that I think we all agree are important for us to continue to kind of see, develop, and foster. One of the statistics that I find most stark, but when you actually look at sort of the race in context of these sorts of things, you start to see even scarier kind of statistics and stories. Our Black male graduation rate, our 6-year graduation rate. So there's a number of guys that start and finish within 6 years is 36% in our country. You have about a 1 in 3 shot when you start your freshman year of college if you're a Black man in the country. It's just an unacceptable number. And there's a lot more that we can do to work on and sort of fix that issue. And so anyway, that's the kind of professional motivation, and then obviously the personal motivation and being tied into it so intimately informs a lot of the work that we're doing with Manual.
So I have a question, and it's kind of been brought up a couple of times in different segments in this conversation. Is you initially said you weren't really struggling in school, so people kind of put it to the side. Didn't, you know what I mean? It didn't really raise any alarms.
Sure.
Now we're also discussing how young men are becoming slowly disconnected from institutions like, going to college or grad school or whatever, and maybe pursuing some of that self-betterment in the younger years. Do you think there's some kind of correlation that the kids or young men are just kind of getting through school, like, let's just get the hell out of high school, and if I do good enough, then people will just leave me alone? I mean, do you see kind of a connection there with how young men are just kind of getting by, just skating through, and then it's what are we doing after? And then where is, have you seen where it maybe is the disconnect with the institution? At some point, you got to be losing trust in institutions, or maybe listening to too many Instagram influencers telling you that you're going to be a real estate mogul. I mean, I don't know,
Yeah.
but you know what I mean?
Bitcoin, big thing.
But there's a lot of value in an education. I mean, it might not be what you end up doing for the rest of your life, but there's something that changes you. It gives you some things to do. It's kind of a training protocol for a lot of things. And it seems like it provide. I mean, I think grad school probably saved my life. Yeah.
I think it's a great question. I think it's a combination of the two things you mentioned, right? I mean, I think we as a society in such a big framing, but sort of even in a smaller framing, let's just think of institutions, right? The institutions that are responsible for raising our young adults, in addition to obviously parents and family units, et cetera. And that's, certainly a part of the conversation. Do we have enough dads out there that are talking about these sorts of topics that are engaging men on that? So I'll leave that to the side, because I certainly think that dads and fatherhood and sort of the adage that sort of hurt men hurt people is certainly something that I think our young men are experiencing. Why do we think, if we know that there are older adult men that never engaged or acknowledged that they needed to get help, or that high school or college was valuable, if they didn't think that, why would their sons be thinking that, when they're 15, 16, 17, presuming that those dads are even around, right? We know that a lot of young men don't necessarily have male role models in their life, or male role models that are accessible. I think the sort of two pieces that I would sort of touch on is, the lack of our institutions connecting with young men and figuring out how to meet them where they are. And then also young men for not the first time, but in a really big way, being fed alternatives that are really unproductive, right? So if you're in high school or if you're in college, we know that from sort of a brain development standpoint, that men are further behind than women. It takes them longer to develop the kinds of things that make them not do dumb things, right? That young men do dumber things just based on the way our brains develop more later into life than young women. So if you're in the context of a high school or collegiate environment, that dumb thing could be talking in class, or it could be getting into trouble with alcohol use or something like that. And I think, largely speaking, our institutions aren't there to say, let's catch you in a non-punitive way and figure out how we're going to get you through. Largely, we're telling these men, don't behave that way. You've done something wrong. And these, remember, are guys that maybe are 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. They might not have ever had an example of a male role model in their life that was effective. And we're telling them, be quiet, sit in the back, don't be who you are. I think that's a really good way to get men to feel disconnected and disengaged. And they say, this thing where I am is obviously not really for me. And so I probably shouldn't be here. Right. And I think that when I talk with a lot of young men across the country, that's what they're saying is like, when I'm in that space, it doesn't feel like it's for me. And so I'm going to go find a different space. Right. And then one other kind of, tangent or aside, but when you look at a lot of the resources that high schools and colleges offer, and this isn't, the faults of the colleges or the high schools by any means, but if you look at our counseling workforce in the United States, 80+% are women, and the vast majority of those are white women. And so if you're a 19-year-old Black or Hispanic guy on a college campus and you're saying, I'm struggling, I need help, there's a good chance that if you walk into the counseling office or you go seek out therapy from your university, that you're not going to be, seeing someone that has a shared experience with you. And that's another kind of signal to these young guys, like this isn't actually for you, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why these guys disconnect. And then you were kind of mentioning, Patrick, or alluding to kind of the influencers around sort of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and how to make money doing real estate or whatever it might be. I actually think that's not even the scariest thing that's out there. I mean, I don't know how much conversation you all have about people like Andrew Tate or people like Liver King or some of these, social media influencers that have millions and millions of impressions with young men. And what they're really, really good at, what Andrew Tate is good at better than anyone else, is saying, you don't fit in over there, but you fit in with me and my culture and what I'm trying to create. So come to my community. And oh, by the way, spend $99 a month on Hustlers Academy, but come to my community. We're going to talk to you in a way that's exciting to you. We're going to show you good looking women. We're going to show you a lifestyle that resonates with who you are right now. And it's not going to feel like you're foreign here. And so these guys go there thinking that they're going to get something, really positive. And then ultimately they're fed a lot of really unproductive, it's kind of difficult lies. But those places are really good at meeting men where they are, even if it's in a really, really negative way. And so if you're a 17 or 18-year-old guy and the institutions aren't speaking to you and you're inundated with social media that is speaking to you, where do you think most of these people are going to wander into? And when they start to wander into one world versus another, that's when they say college isn't for me. I don't think I should be here anymore. Some of them disconnect completely. I think that's where a lot of suicide and overdose and problem drinking, things like that develop and happen. But I think it's the combination of those factors, right? There's really new negative influences that have popped up over the last handful of years. And our institutions haven't quite yet caught up to the idea of, we need to figure out how to engage these men, because historically their graduation rates and their enrollment rates haven't been a problem. And so we didn't need to solve that problem before. Now I think we do.
So actually, we do have some experience with some of those like influencers that kind of create that environment. But something that definitely you mentioned that I feel a lot of people know but don't say is that it's pretty difficult if you have struggles to go somewhere and then have a white woman try to tell you that she understands and can relate to it. That's definitely pretty difficult, because that's, especially in healthcare, that's a huge population of the healthcare workers are white females. So it is difficult as a man of any, ethnical background to kind of go in there and have someone try to tell you that they understand your struggle, cold cut from your first meeting. So it definitely really puts that offsetting point. But back when you said the influencers, yeah, we actually have some experiences with people, and it's crazy that you can run a platform and then offer a meeting, offer some kind of program where you're charging hundreds of dollars for these people that maybe even fly across the country and then potentially do dangerous activities without, the person doesn't have any kind of medical background. They don't have any kind of like safety background. They're just some guy that you saw on the internet that's charismatic. He's got a good tongue. And then now you're out here spending your money, you're putting yourself in a bad situation. So, and that's us all ages too. That's not even just the young people. There's still older folk who do that, which, past development, they should kind of know better at a certain point. But it's something that we don't talk about as men. So like they find that outlook that kind of give them a connection of somebody that they think they can relate to and kind of, I don't want to say create friendships, but get some kind of social connection.
Well, we're at a place where men's loneliness and lack of friends, like lack of a close friend, is the highest that it's been in the last, handful of decades, right? And so these guys are desperate, and they're trying to cling on to something, that they're trying to cling on to something that's out there, even if that thing is not necessarily the most productive for them. They're reaching for it because they're not necessarily being met in a big way elsewhere. And so I think you're spot on. And I think to your point, around the sort of the workforce issue that you mentioned earlier, it's something that we talk about a lot. And like I said, it's not necessarily the problem of these institutions. I mean, I think it's the problem that needs to be solved, maybe on a governmental level or a workforce development issue, et cetera. But when you think about, even take women's health and OB-GYNs and sort of the history there of 50, 60, 70 years ago. And I think even today, many would argue that too many of our OB-GYNs are 70-year-old white men, right? And that often when a young adult female goes into the office of a 70-year-old white man, it's not necessarily that they're going to get bad medical care, but it is there's inevitably going to be a disconnect in terms of that person's experience with someone else's experience. And so all the things we've done on women's health in terms of introducing, even the concept of doulas and introducing sort of different kind of care mechanisms that allow more women with lived experiences of things like pregnancy, childbirth, et cetera, bringing that person into the room and saying that's going to improve our outcomes. There's a lot of really good evidence that that's the case. For some reason, when we look at men and mental health, we don't say that the workforce and what these guys are seeing will matter. And I just don't think that that's probably going to bear out in the long run. I think we're certainly doing some research on this topic. I know that there's increasingly interest in researching why men are hesitant to seek out help and why that affects outcomes. But it reasons out for me that if we got more men in the sort of therapy, counseling, et cetera, kind of workforce, and that those men were able to make more genuine connections with their clients and the people that they're serving, that would produce better outcomes, and that more men would want to go and have that conversation with people that they felt like could understand where they were coming from. That just makes sense to me.
Well, I definitely think that there's two great points that have been made already. Is that I know when Cam and I started pharmacy school, we're talking years back now. I think that USF was very unique in the fact that it was 50-50, 50% male, 50% female for the most part, in our class.
Whereas our class was actually 1% off. It was 51 to 49.
Oh, really?
Still pretty close.
But I mean, in the world of pharmacy, that's very close because you're generally dealing with 65-35 type females to males. And I remember going to pharmacy school, and a urologist buddy of mine was like, "Oh, you're going to pharmacy school? You're going to forget your skirt when you go to class and stuff." Just making the, "Oh, you're a girl" joke.
Sure.
And I didn't get it. And I was like, yeah, well, I don't understand what your joke is. But then I get to school, and then there's all this well, there's definitely a lot of females in the world of pharmacy, and you kind of start going on rotations, and you're like, well, you know what, maybe there is. And then another another point is having people in the kind of healthcare community that resonate. I mean, when I started going to therapy a few years ago, I mean, to this day, pretty much every therapist I've ever seen has been a white woman. And you said that, and I was like, huh, that's interesting. And I didn't realize it until you kind of said it. It just, there wasn't that. I mean, that's just your options. I started using the school option because it was free and affordable. And you're going through, and it's just different age white women. And then finally, somebody who is older kind of resonated with me, kind of understood my background a little bit more. So I was like, okay, I'll stick with this one. And then even now, my current therapist is a white lady, and I think even in the search for it, I think that's just kind of, don't mean to generalize, but it's true. And I think you make a lot of great points in bringing that up, that there probably is a huge disconnect for men being even comfortable enough to say something to a woman is difficult. I mean,
well, a lot of these guys, right? A lot of these guys, and it's so interesting, right? Even get over the stigma of reaching out for help. a lot of these young men haven't ever had a productive example of how to interact with women in general, even in a non-romantic way, right? They might have grown up only seeing adult men treat adult women very terribly or speak down to them, right? That this isn't universal, but certainly you hear about these stories. And so then the idea that that guy would immediately be able to trust a professional that really is in a position of power to them to some degree, right? That they're giving advice and they're listening and all those sorts of things. And so it's a huge issue. And I think at a minimum, right, this isn't to say, and Patrick, it sounds like you've had good examples with therapy, and and I certainly have have had female therapists that have provided me a lot of help and are amazing, right? It's not to say that those people can't provide good care, medical care, good advice, guidance to young men. But what I do think it means is that we need to do a better job of connecting and being a translator to these young guys to at least say, hey, it's worth trying this. It's worth trusting this person. With some of the universities that we work with, a big part of our job is just trying to tell these guys that it's okay to give someone a shot, even if that person might not immediately sort of resonate with you, or at least visually from that person's lived experience, that, hey, this is a trusted person, even if it might seem like someone that's very different from your background. We think you should trust them as guys, right? Like we're sharing that with young guys who are sharing that with other young guys. So we're not going to, the workforce isn't going to change tomorrow. Frankly, we're probably 5, 10, 15, 20 years from the workforce changing to being more equal. And that's assuming that we do all the right things today, right? Like I don't necessarily think that we're going to have a different ratio of therapists in 20 years, but we have the sort of cards that we're dealt right now. And so we have to sort of acknowledge that that's what the workforce is. And we have to figure out ways to plug in and sort of connect and touch guys on this topic and say, these people are trusted. You can go and create good relationships with them, even if your initial reaction is that person will never understand me.
Well, I think it's a good point too. I'm sure you guys probably do it, but to emphasize that their information is protected by HIPAA and those kind of governing bodies, right? Because it's like, I think a lot of people, and especially younger people, don't really know that exists necessarily. And so when they're having these, conversations, they're like, well, is this going to get out? Is this going to become public information? Is this person going to say something behind my back? And, is there a disconnect with the guy being able to do the quote unquote locker room talk with your therapist? Yeah. I mean, you can't locker room talk with everybody, right? So, and we found that out a few years ago in an election, or right before one. But the thing is that you have to be able to say what you want and what you mean. And if you feel like in a therapy session that you're holding back something, you might get some benefit, but you might not get that full 100% benefit or close to it, where you're able to, speak freely and then also get the answers that you need.
Well, I'll say the example I always give that I think really resonates with people, because it's not something you think about. It's almost like we're so attuned to the idea that men shouldn't be open with each other about what they're going through, and that women are open with each other about what we're going through, that we don't realize there's this very stark divide happening. But to your point, Patrick, of the sort of issues with how open men are, when I go and talk, when I've done work in the past, in and around women's health, or in speaking with young women about what was their entry point into the healthcare system, or what was the thing that got them to decide to reach out for help. And most often I am hearing it from the vast majority of the women that I've spoken with on this topic. It's, I have a really good relationship with my sister, or I call my mom a couple times per week and she knows everything about me, or I've got this group chat with a group of girlfriends and we tell each other everything. And if I'm struggling about any taboo thing, I can go to them. And often they're the ones who tell me and sort of ring the alarm bell that actually what you're going through, it's a bit abnormal, right? Like you actually should get more help. And that's often a trigger for, I think, women to go and seek out that more professional care. Men, on the other hand, right, if I go and talk with the young guys that we work with, we have a little over 8,000 guys on the platform and sort of have had that kind of interaction with these young guys, when I will have conversations with them about who do you go to on these sensitive topics, right? Almost 30% of men by the age of 25, 30 have an issue with erectile dysfunction. We have, significant double-digit percentage of young men dealing with mental health and substance use issues. And I go and ask these guys, like, which of your buddies are you going to? Are you calling your dad up when you're having these kinds of issues? It's crickets, right? They're not having those dialogues. A lot of these guys don't have that network, but even the ones who do, the guys who are in fraternities, the guys who have those kinds of social networks, they're not having that kind of more intense dialogue that I think women often are having. And so not only is there that kind of trust factor of like, oh, this could get out, but even in sort of a more productive sense of this conversation of like what gets people into deciding they need more help. Often it's the people that are closest around you. And if those guys aren't having that dialogue, they're never going to go and get into it. And so there's just such a fear from these guys that they're going to be judged by the people around them, and that the community is going to say, I have a more negative perception of you now. And so whether or not that's a fear that's going to get leaked from a therapist, or that some guy is going to see you walk into the therapy, center on campus, that's a buddy of yours, like there's a lot of fear in these guys that could happen. And that I think is preventing a lot of that outreach that we need to have happen.
For sure.
Well, I think a big reason behind it, and it's something that I feel personally as well. We spoke about in the podcast recently, is that a lot of men feel that it's kind of like putting a burden on other people to kind of discuss these issues. Because like for myself, like I don't talk to my family about any things like that. Because in my opinion, like it's not their business. So like I don't talk to my family about stuff like that. But I do have, we have a group chat where we could, kind of go into and talk things about. We're really supportive in the group chat. So I saw this thing recently where it's like guys have two group chats. They have like one where it's it's got a raunchy title to the group chat, but it's like where all your good support friends are. And then you got one that's like my friends from 9 a.m. Saturday at that place, and it's like your terrorist group that you're talking like just crazy stuff about. So we have the group chat stuff like that, but again, it's one of those things that got guys feel is putting a burden on other people, so they don't want to discuss these kind of issues because we feel that, as you mentioned yourself, you grew up in a town that had like a lot of manly men there, where they're doing these jobs, they're having all their stuff kept to themselves. No one seems like they have an issue, and it's just because you don't see that burden being discussed or being moved around. That's what I think a lot of men have, that perception.
Yeah. Look, I think part of the conversation here is we need to be a little bit pragmatic about masculinity, and men being raised in a certain way is going to continue to happen, right? And that is going to be at least for probably a good portion of our lifetimes, many men, like I think the three of us, are going to be socialized in a particular way. Right. And I think it's really important. And like I said, a lot of my work is in sort of health promotion. And I think one of the things that we get wrong a lot is not matching the message with the audience on these sorts of topics. And so, one of the things that I actually kind of rail against a little bit, or sort of have some concerns about, is I feel like every time we talk about men and mental health or boys and mental health, I hear this idea of like, boys can cry too. Right. Like I think that's a narrative that gets tossed around a lot. Like when we're trying to do campaigns around men's mental health, it's telling men that they can cry, that they can be vulnerable, all these sorts of things. Well, a lot of guys for 25 years of their lives have been told that crying is like the worst thing that you could possibly show anyone ever. And so if the first message that they're hearing around mental health care is you're going to go into a therapist's office, and to get quality help from it, you need to cry. Right. A lot of those guys are going to say, well, I don't even know how I would be able to cry. So obviously therapy is not going to be something for me, or getting this kind of help is not something for me. And so we try to be a bit more realistic about these guys. Look, you don't need to go every day with every guy in your life, tell them about how you're feeling or where you're struggling, or be super emotive about what's going on. Like, I think that's an unrealistic expectation. And also, I don't think it's necessary to get these guys to you don't have to super fundamentally change yourself to say, I need to rethink what resiliency is. I need to rethink what my network is in terms of who's there to support me when things get tougher. We don't root for guys to always be struggling and to always have to have conversations with their guy friends about all the bad things that are going on, right? I'm hopeful that more often than not, you can have silly text conversations with your buddies and talk about the game or talk about work or talk about anything else that's going on in your life. It's about saying that when those situations do arise where you do need help, that you can be open with the people around you in a way where you know you're not going to be judged, and they're going to step in and care for you when you need that kind of help. And so I think that's just where we have to evolve. Part of the conversation is we don't need men to start perfectly behaving like women to get them into help and to get them, to get care and to get them to be supportive of each other. We just need to meet them on the topics of resiliency and self-care and all these sorts of things, and get our groups of guys to sort of pivot themselves slightly to be more open and accepting on these kinds of topics.
Yeah, I mean, this is personally for me, but I think the boys can cry too message is like super cringe, and it doesn't work for me. I mean, have I had a good cry in my life? Absolutely. Does it feel good afterwards and you kind of like get a nice reset? For sure. I do it in private, you know what I mean? And it's just like a personal thing, right? But just I feel like that message, I mean, that message disconnects me, and I'm a huge advocate for men's mental health and therapy and all that stuff. And it's just like, that's kind of lame.
I've I've spent
You know?
no, I'm with you. Look, I've spent, I've now we've been working on Manual for about 13 months or so. So we're still relatively new, but I've sort of had the privilege of meeting with in dozens of counseling centers across the country on college campuses. And every single sign, the messages are, it's okay to be vulnerable, get help, we're here for you, right? Like it's okay to tell us how you're feeling, right? That's the message that if you walk into a physical location, right, that's what you're going to see, and that's what you're going to hear. That is I'll just use myself as an example, right? And not even getting into, sort of other men that I've interacted with, right? But that's the opposite of the way I was socialized. You're taught to figure it out yourself, right? That getting help is actually a sign of weakness, and being vulnerable is not something that you're supposed to do outside of, the confines of your home, if even at all, right? And so if we try to meet people with messages that are the exact polar opposite of how they've been raised for 2 decades, it's just an uphill climb, like let alone it being cringe, right? Which I sort of agree with, but like it's just going to be difficult. You might eventually get guys there, but it's going to take a lot longer than trying to meet them on the playing fields that they're more used to. And so a lot of the messages that we send, and the ones that tend to resonate, are ones of sort of self-improvement and I hate the word optimization because I think it's taken in a lot of different ways, but that kind of idea and that kind of mentality, right? You can sleep better, you're going to get better grades, you're going to perform better at your, rec league basketball game, whatever that is, if you take care of your mental health, or if you adjust when and how you use substances, right? Like guys are much more attuned into that. I mean, Justin talks about this a lot. Dr. Human talks about this a lot, of like, getting to guys who are 19, 20, 21 that aren't performing sexually, right? That are having issues with erectile dysfunction. The vast majority of them are dealing with issues of anxiety or of substance misuse. One of the best ways to have a conversation with a guy about why they need to take care of their mental health is if they're not being able to perform, sexually, and when they're having issues with erectile dysfunction. Like when you can have that conversation with a 19-year-old guy, like that's the reason why you're struggling to get it up when you're with girls. They're much more interested in having that dialogue with you about how they can fix that problem than if you say, I want you to deal with your anxiety so that you can get more attuned with your emotions, right? Like they're not that excited about that dialogue. Hopefully they get there, right? Like I want more men to cry. I think that we should, right? That being more emotionally vulnerable over time is a good thing to aspire to. But if that's the starting point of the negotiation with these guys, you're going to lose every time.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that's kind of a big point of like what we do here too, is that occasionally we promote healthy food. It's kind of like a trick. It's like, all right, we'll promote healthy food. Well, it's not a trick because it actually works, but we promote this like healthy food, healthy shake, whatever. And then, well, it's going to help your blood flow. You know what that means. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, I've just tricked you to, eat more fruits and vegetables and less processed foods. Right. And so it's kind of, and not a trick is a bad word, but it's like, that this is like definitely a way to reach out to guys, is like break down that superficial cars, chicks, sports, superficial like kind of relationship, and then you start diving into things that actually matter to them, rather than you can be more in tune with your emotions, because they don't really care about that. It doesn't really matter. But the big thing is like, well, how's my thing working? Oh, well, it's not working because I watch too much porn, or because I'm using too many drugs, or whatever the case may be. And you're like, okay, well, here's some easily addressable topics that we can kind of work on that actually can correlate to a pretty direct resolution, right? I mean, you eat better food for yourself, you're going to have better erections. You take care of your mental health, you're going to have potentially better erections. So, I mean, getting to that point, I think, is actually pretty intelligent. I can see kind of where Dr. H, probably threw some strategy in there too.
Totally. And it's not all, look, it's not for a lot of these guys. I think sometimes we almost over index on the guys only want to talk about sports cars and sex sort of thing, right? That sometimes I think we over rotate, right? It's for us, it's not only about meeting them on topics of sex and erections and these sorts of things. That's certainly part of it. But like, most guys want to sleep better. Most guys want to do better in the gym. Most guys want to lose a few pounds or put on a few pounds, right? Like most guys would rather be getting A's and B's than C's and D's, right? Most guys would rather make $10,000 more than $10,000 less dollars, right? Like these are all kind of, and I think that's probably most humans in general, but just for on the topic of men specifically, that I think is something that they mostly want to do. And so if you can meet them on those playing fields of taking care of different elements of yourself, right? Not just mental health, but all different elements, those are going to be able to help you achieve those sorts of goals. I just think you're going to have a lot more success than when you say, hey, we're going to make you feel better, and we're going to make you feel better, and we're going to fix your anxiety. Like that as an outcome to these guys, even if that's the outcome that gets them all those other things I was just talking about, that in and of itself is not compelling enough for these guys to say, hey, I'm going to go and take that step to tell someone I'm not doing well so that I can get the support that I need.
Oh yeah. Well, it's that, the whole I can fix it myself mentality. So you're not going to, if that's the goal that's being pitched to you, you're like, oh, I can take care of that myself and I can, fix that. But, getting that relationship with that healthcare provider or that, whoever is offering those services, you want to make that connection. So as males, at a young age, we start, thinking with our dicks essentially. So if that's the meeting point that kind of creates that goal there, that's kind of what I don't want to say it should be targeted, I guess, but it definitely needs to be more of an open spot to it. Because you go to a counselor's office, therapist's office, and it has those signs like you mentioned earlier. We don't care about that. Like, we're not going to openly care about that. Like, we see that, we're like, it's something that needs to be hidden, kind of like a secondary outcome that you want to happen, of course. But like, as you mentioned, we're not going to go for that straight away. We want to see the stuff that's on our forefront of our mind that will allow the other stuff to get fixed. And that's
here's the analogy. Here's the analogy I would give, right? That if you're trying to, do repairs around your house or fix a car or whatever, I think a lot of guys that I've interacted with, people in general, but guys too, I think take a lot of pride in teaching themselves skills to figure out how to fix those problems. And then in the scenario where they tried to fix the problem and they couldn't figure it out, they would go to a professional, right? And I think that most men would say, I would much rather teach myself over time how to take care of this thing so that I could do it myself and that I could be self-reliant. And if I need to go and get help, I will, but I'm gonna sort of dedicate myself to building skills to fix this problem. I actually don't think that's a bad approach for guys with something like mental health. The problem is we don't teach ourselves those skills over time to prevent us from needing professional help. So we have neither of those things. We neither have the skills to fix the proverbial car, and we don't go to the professional to help us fix the problem, right? So if a guy comes up to me and says, hey, look, therapy's not for me, I don't think it's, what I want to do. And presuming that there's obviously not, more significant issues at play, right? There's certain times where you absolutely need to go to professionals, whether that be for medications or for more serious mental illness or whatever it might be. But if a guy had a more moderate or mild case of anxiety, depression, he said, look, man, I'm really attuned to what's going on with me, right? I meditate every day. I talk with my buddies when I need to about what I'm going through. I do all these things to fix my problem. And so I don't actually think I need to go and get that professional help to sort of fix the mental health engine very often. I probably wouldn't give them much different advice. I'd say that's great that you're taking care of yourself. Like, I think it's great that you've taught these coping mechanisms and these skills to get you through tougher times. And if and when you can't figure it out, you can go to the professional and get that kind of support. The problem is we have neither, right? We have a hesitancy to go seek out help, and we've never built those coping mechanisms and those skills for ourselves, or at least many of us haven't. And so we both can't fix the car ourselves, and we have a hesitation to go to a professional. And so what ends up happening, we have a broken car, right? And I think that is part of the dialogue that needs to shift with guys, is that, like, if you want to be self-reliant around your mental and physical health, that's not a bad thing to aspire to, but it means you need to invest in time, invest in both time and resources, the ability to teach yourself the skill to be self-reliant. You can't just hope that tomorrow it's going to be sorted out, right? That's where that kind of wishful thinking becomes very, unproductive.
That's a fantastic analogy, actually, because that's kind of how I am myself. So I will do most things, almost anything, try to learn it myself and do it myself, and then I won't call a professional until I've completely fucked some shit up. So keep that with yourself. You think you can fix it, and then with myself there, if you're calling a professional when you've completely fucked it up, being a person, that's not a really good spot to be, because now your car is not only broke, but your car is fucked. So it's an amazing analogy.
If tomorrow every guy, we turn on, snap our fingers, and tomorrow every guy is meditating every day, he's checking in with his friends about, how they're doing, is going on a run, starting to eat a little bit healthier, doing some sort of, going on Reddit and trying to figure out, or going on, social media and trying to investigate why they might be feeling the way that they are and fixing that problem themselves. Many of these issues that we're talking about would start to dramatically shift, right? So it's not just, hey, all of a sudden we need more therapists, right? There's a lot of ways to, get at this problem. We just have to, figure out how to do it and how to get these guys excited about it.
Very cool. So, Matt, let's talk a little bit about Manual. I know that you're the CEO of this platform, and I know that you guys, if I don't know you too well, met you today, but I know Dr. H, and if I know that he's involved, it's probably going to be pretty amazing. So, what is Manual, and tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, of course. And so Justin's my co-founder. He's our chief medical officer, and I think you both alluded to Justin's ability to sort of connect with young men on pretty difficult topics and resonate. I think that like him as sort of the personification of what we're trying to do is a really good, it's a great personification of what we're trying to do. Fundamentally, when we looked at all the different problems of young men on these topics, and we've sort of talked about a lot of this already today, it was that disconnect and lack of translation that was happening with these men that we thought was the biggest problem that we'd be able to solve, right? We're not going to be able to all of a sudden make sure that every counseling center across the country has a male therapist. I would love to do that. When we talk with universities that have male counselors, guess what? The rate of men going to therapy goes up dramatically, right? If we could snap our fingers and do that, we would do it, and it would be very impactful, right? But that's a really hard thing to do structurally. And so for us, it was, how do we get more men to be more comfortable seeking out help from the resources and the communities around them? One of the really fascinating things on this journey is that high schools and colleges are actually one of the better resourced places in our country around mental health care. Almost every college has a counseling center. A bunch now have telehealth options. A bunch have academic advisors and tutors and peer support. You are often living around people of your same age that have similar experiences to you, right? It's actually a really great place potentially to start kind of that self-care, mental health journey, all these sorts of things. Unfortunately, our engagement with men in these sorts of resources is extremely low, right? I've talked with a lot of different counselors across the country. The ratio I've heard is anywhere between 3-to-1 and 9-to-1 in terms of women going and getting their services versus men, right? 9-to-1 is an extremely dramatic statistic, but even 3-to-1 is also extremely dramatic, right? That we know that men are more likely to die by suicide, more likely to die by overdose, less likely to graduate. And at the same time, they are far less likely to go and get the help that is being offered to them, right? So what we wanted to do was build a set of interventions, mostly accessed digitally. We did that because for men, it was more accessible, and it was something that was gave them a sense of anonymity that was really important, right? And a real, the reality of anonymity, of being able to engage on these topics without necessarily having to immediately out yourself as struggling with them. And so we started creating content, this kind of masterclass style content that features experts like Justin and people who are sort of experts in their field, but content that is built and designed in a way that is more resonant to men, right? So we've gotten rid of a lot of the dialogue around getting help, and more dialogue around sort of self-care and self-evolution and self-development and all these sorts of things, right? So the language we use is different. The content is primarily shot with young men who are from a lot of diverse backgrounds, right? So if you're a young guy, you're going to be hearing from an expert that often looks like you or has a similar background to you, and they're going to be using language that is resonant with you, right? We pair that with what we call our men's guides. So getting to the issue that I was talking about, 15, 20 minutes ago, about how men aren't willing to go to other men about the topics that they're struggling with, we've actually tried to sort of manufacture that experience in this platform. So we have young men on our team. They're college graduates themselves. They operate this anonymous chat line. You as a user know who you're talking to, right? You know the profile of the individual giving you advice, but you know that they don't know your profile, right? They unless you give up that information, you know that you are functionally anonymous to them. And then we surround that with a number of different nudges and kind of behavioral nudges that encourage men to check in on themselves, right? So weekly newsletters, we do monthly live streams. We have a social media channel where we have sort of private content that men can kind of access. So we really try to surround these guys with different kind of nudges and touch points that make them think about these kinds of topics. And then inevitably, our goal is actually not to necessarily keep them on the manual platform all the time. It's to go and get that help from the community that surrounds them, right? So a lot of what we're doing in partnering with these universities and with these high schools is linking them into the help that already exists, right? We're not going in and duplicating resources. We're trying to create health engagement, health promotion, sort of developmental opportunities for these guys to start taking care of themselves, and then know when they need to go and get help and how to kind of do that. And so, so it's been a really great, initial, like I said, 12, 13 months. We launched at 2 universities in the fall, the University of Mississippi and Morgan State University. We went live on October 1st, right? So we're only, 8 months old. We're on pace to be working with, it looks like at least, 20 universities, potentially more, by the fall. Some pretty exciting partners. We're working at the University of Maryland. We're working at the University of Alabama. We're working with a number of HBCUs, Morgan State University and Clark Atlanta University. We work with a number of Hispanic serving institutions, Elmhurst, MSU Denver. So it's been really exciting. Like I said, we're at a little over 8,000 men enrolled in the platform at these partner campuses. And we've been doing some cool research around it, and we're pretty excited about what's to come. But I think for many of the guys that we're interacting with, we're often the first person that's ever talked to them about these topics in a non-punitive way, right? For most of these guys, the only time they've ever thought about mental health, substance use, etc., is I've fucked up, and now someone's telling me I need to go and do this mandatory training. I can tell you from the conversations that I have with these guys, that is not resonating with them. It's not working. It's not sinking in. They call it a joke more often than not. So being able to meet them in a way that is more developmental, more about self-help, more about self-care, I think we've had a lot of success with it, and we're excited to kind of see what will happen over the next few years.
Very good. Do you think that by having this platform, it will influence other men to kind of take the reins themselves and start getting into more mental health oriented professions? Is there any kind of push for that, or just like, maybe we'll just baby steps for now?
No, look, I think it's a great, one of the things we talked about, you're getting into more Matthew big idea time than necessarily what we do right now. But when I think about all the things and all the reasons, and Patrick, you alluded to this earlier, sort of the way that people responded to you when you decided to go and seek out your degree of the skirt jokes and all these sorts of things. I think a lot of the reasons why men are hesitant to go into fields of nursing and mental health, these kind of heal jobs, if you've heard of the concept of sort of heal jobs, education and health and all these sort of other professions that men go to far less than women go to. I do think that the idea of can you be a masculine nurse is something that runs through the head of a lot of 17, 18, 19-year-old guys. So if Manual starts to be able to show that we can convince these guys that there is a toughness in being able to provide to your family and provide care to people around you, whether that's being a nurse or a pharmacist or being a teacher or whatever it might be. If we're able to prove that in the concept of Manual in terms of getting help there, I would love if Manual could evolve into something that begins to solve some of these workforce issues, right? It's a huge problem. It's not going to go away. And it self-perpetuates, right? The less men that are therapists means the less men that go to therapy who then decide that it's okay for them to become a therapist due to sort of unhealthy masculinity that's telling them that they shouldn't go be a therapist or a nurse or whatever it might be. So something needs to interrupt that cycle. I would love if we could be a part of that story. We're not quite there yet. And I think to your point, just seeing if we can get these guys to like take care of themselves a little bit is a big first step, but hopefully we can evolve beyond that. Certainly something we've talked about.
Well, based on a personal experience, I have seen some male nurses kick some serious ass. I was on a rotation with a guy that came in overdosing on methamphetamine, so just straight off his wig. And for whatever reason, I think they lowered the midazolam drip, which is like the kind of keep him sedative from losing his shit in the ICU. And man, that guy popped up when they lowered the drip, and the male nurse came in and handled it. Got him down, got the Haldol dart like in his arm. I was like, oh my God, this guy's gonna beat somebody's ass. So you are not tough if you're a male nurse.
I don't really know. It's fascinating how these things, right? Sometimes you have to take a step back and you're like, how do we get to the way we view certain things and sort of accept certain things? Like, I certainly don't look at any nurses out there and say, yeah, I don't think they're tough. That's not
what I'm thinking.
My mentality coming out of COVID was, yeah, nurses not tough. That was not what I was thinking, right? I was like, wow, those are some of the toughest people that are out there. So why do we think as men or young men that going into that profession would show some sort of weakness? I don't know, right? I mean, there's a lot of dumb things that happen in dumb ways we think because of the way we're socialized and the way that gender norms develop and all these sorts of things. So I'm not sure where the origin of that is. But I think sometimes those kinds of stories, like what you just shared, those are the kinds of stories we need to be telling 15, 16, 17-year-old guys, right? Like, I think if we had more men becoming nurses than taking big bets on dumb crypto, we'd have a lot of guys who were wealthier, who were better, providers to the people around them. And we'd solve a big workforce issue. So hopefully we can start that kind of conversation with these guys. That'd be a great outcome.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a male nurse too, you have a little bit of disposable income, so you can keep making those dumb bets. And so just like, you lose your whole bag and now you're SOL.
There you go. Yeah. maybe that's the translation point. You can invest more in crypto if you have a steady income from your nursing job during the day. That could be a good way to meet these guys where they are. I don't know. I'm certainly not going to endorse it, but that might be a good more money for the fantasy football pot or whatever could be a good way to encourage them.
My league this year, everybody's got like adult jobs now, so the league fees are going up. So
yeah, exactly. Yes, if you want to keep up with your buddies, you're going to need to go into one of these jobs. Yeah, no, I like that.
So Cam, you got anything?
I'm gonna say right now, if those damn football rates start going up, my ass might be fucking bailing from that league. I'll tell you that. Like, yeah, I would make big boy money, but shit, I ain't trying to spend it on betting fantasy football.
I told my team on the fantasy football team, we do these live streams, and it's funny to see which ones guys show up to and which ones don't. And I was saying, I told some of my team, they kind of laughed at me, and I was like, no, I'm being serious. I was like, could we get one of these Matthew Berry types, the TMR kind of people of the people who do fantasy football advice. Like, could we get one of them on our live stream to give sort of private, exclusive fantasy football tips, and then in the last 2 minutes, just tell these guys like, oh, by the way, you should go to a therapist if you want. Like, could that be a good way to resonate with these guys, come August, September? So I'll report back on whether or not that's a good way to engage these guys, but it's something we might experiment with. Who knows?
That would
Very
probably
good.
get some serious traction though, because like even in our league, I don't take fantasy football serious by like any means,
No.
but like some of my friends will they'll do more research for fantasy football than they did for pharmacy school. So
Yeah.
it is insanity. So that'd be a pretty good platform to kind of get them.
I think so. Yeah. Hey, look, you're going to get an hour of unfettered access that nobody else gets if you come through this platform. And oh, by the way, we're just going to sell you in the last 2 minutes on why you should start meditating or whatever. Yeah. Well, who knows, right? Like, who knows? You gotta throw a lot at the wall and see what sticks, and that could be one thing that we try.
Very good. Well, guys, Matt, Stefanko, pleasure having you on. We definitely learned a lot and can't wait to see what your platform manual does as it begins to launch more and more.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys.